You are now listening to the House by the Video Store podcast.
There's no more room in hell. The dead will walk here.
We have such sights to show you.
I kick ass for the Lord.
Praise God, boy.
Welcome to the House by Video Store podcast. I'm your host, William. Joining today will be Derek and Sean.
Hello.
And on this episode, we're discussing the Blair Witch Project, the 1999 movie that...
MTV.
So I've heard a lot of people talk about seeing, like, back in that era, seeing a double bill, like a drive-in of Sixth Sense and Blair Witch Project.
This is the most ultimate 90s thing ever.
But, like, I remember those movies of that era being huge, and...
Weren't they 2 years apart?
Well, the thing, too, I remember for the Blair Witch Project was, like, the sci-fi, like, Burkittsville documentary things about the Blair Witch, like, the stuff that surrounded it.
Yeah.
Where they played it up like a real event.
Wasn't it, like, really heavy on MTV, too? Because I remember seeing a bunch of stuff on MTV for it.
Yeah, I mean, and I just remember them, like, the marketing of that movie was...
It's real.
It was amazing. And the marketing of that, I think, worked then in the infancy of the internet. Or maybe not the infancy, but when the internet was not what it is today. Social media didn't exist. People, I think that was even before the, it was before MySpace that people had the pages on. Angel Fire?
That's before my time.
What was it? There was like these personal pages people had on
Geosites.
stuff. Geosites or
Personal ads in
GeoCities.
newspapers. This movie, so
This was like back in the era when it was like chat rooms and message boards, and it was before social media. It was before smartphones. So the internet was a tool that could disseminate information, but it wasn't the all-encompassing, comprehensive
Overlord that it is now.
where you could find out pretty much anything at any point. Now it's a bit different. So the Blair Witch is something I don't think could happen again.
No.
But the time that it happened, if people saw it thinking it was real, I could imagine that being what they thought was the scariest thing they'd ever seen.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's a marketing thing that, you know, it's hard to review that now versus back when it came out.
The closest thing we've had to that is Paranormal Activity. Like, that Paranormal Activity is the closest thing I think we'll ever get back to that, because it was marketed in the same way.
But Paranormal Activity, I very vividly remember hearing, oh, this was made for $15,000 and sold at a film fest.
Yeah.
They then spent a few $100,000 cleaning up the audio and reshooting it, but...
But again, like, your general audience did not know that, so that's really why he'll push it.
But it's one of those things where, so like, Paranormal Activity, which is really hard for me to say for some reason.
Yeah, I almost say with the T.
I've never seen that
Activity.
movie.
So I saw it in theaters when it came out, and I enjoyed it because it was a packed audience, so that made it fun. It was a packed audience at 11 p.m., so it was really fun. And it was more of the experience that was fun, because it's literally just a camera sitting in a room and
Can we just
stuff
be honest
happens.
that Blair Witch and Paranormal Activity are both like Seinfeld, and that they are literally a movie about nothing?
Well, the thing...
Like,
So I think the big thing about movies like that is the experience. So for Blair Witch, it was people seeing it thinking it was real and that it was actually literally found footage.
Yeah.
And then Paranormal Activity was more of the communal audience experience of other people losing their mind, being scared in the theater. But I do think that, like, Paranormal Activity and all these other things, those are Robert Rodriguez's El Mariachi. We're like, oh, he made it for $7,000. Like, well, he may have shot most of it for $7,000, but then they spent thousands upon thousands of more dollars after the fact on making it what you see when you watch a DVD or Blu-ray now. And same thing with Paranormal Activity. They may have shot the initial version for $15,000, but I think they went back and reshot some endings and then spent, $100,000 on sound editing or something. So it's one of those things where they kind of create these myths about what you can achieve for certain budget levels, which may be...
I guess you can achieve it. It's just the studio can clean up your mess.
Yeah, well, I think it's just that, like, so people think that for $15,000 you can make a $100 million grossing movie, and you can, but the version they screened for people in the theater did not cost $15,000 to get there. It's just they will clean those elements up. But
I think Clerks, I remember watching I was obsessed with that movie for a while. I think that was like 26 or 27,000, somewhere in that ballpark.
Yeah.
But then they said, they made it for that. But then when they actually were going to release it, they licensed music for it. And replaced some of the soundtrack, and that music licensing cost more than the whole budget of the film, alone.
I had looked. There was Music Bet, or I forget which service it was. There was some of these different music leasing services, and I was looking for music when we were doing the short film Hazard, and I came across one of the websites had like a catalog Johnny Cash song. So not any of the singles, just something off one of his albums from like the 80s or something. So a song that I don't think I even heard before, and that. Just to use that song in a short film that was screened online or in film competitions but not distributed on a disc for sale was $5,000. Mm-hmm. And this is for a song that may have never been played on the radio, if ever, maybe once or twice in the 80s. It was so a song that I had never heard that was from a mainstream artist was $5,000 to use in an online only like YouTube, Vimeo, Facebook post of a short film that could also play at film festivals, but could not play at commercial screenings or be on a disc and sold.
So if you want to hear Johnny Cash in our next short, please donate to the Patreon. We'll have that as a tier of $5,000. Use a rare unknown Johnny Cash song in a short.
Even obscure bands that I have never heard of in my life that are local-ish bands. I've heard people who talk about like local filmmakers said that somebody said, it was like $25,000 to license a song. As like that's
obscene. Worth more than your entire band.
That is insane because this is a band that no one knows or cares about. So it's just crazy to me. A lot, I guess too. Like I've heard people for like smaller movies went out to the artists themselves and asked smaller artists, and then were able to work something out because it's
always usually the studio, the label.
Well, I think it was for Reservoir Dogs when they were making that. Tarantino was wanting to get some music for it. And they were talking to the licensing people, and they said, no, it's like $1 million. And then eventually they're like, look, this director is going to be the next big thing. Here, watch this. Like, he is amazing. This is going to be a hit, and this will make your song sell so many copies because the movie is going to be a cultural thing. And then it did, and it worked out for him. But how many times is that the case, and the movie is terrible, and the people wish they had never licensed their music to it? But before we get into the Blair Witch Project, we can briefly go through... We don't have any news. We're recording this the same day as our prior podcast, and we went through all the news on the last one, so we can just go through briefly things we've been watching. So, Sean, you had watched something, right?
Yeah, real quick, too. I did start refreshing our Patreon account. I don't know if we'll have any exclusive perks anytime soon, but I kind of cleared out some stuff, and I'm going to try to start updating it with a post and everything.
So, too, something we might do is we have at least one short film in the works that I want to try to get shot in like the next month and done and release in October.
We have two because Chad...
Yeah, so there'll be two. That one's going to be more of an October shoot. So my plan is to have one done in the next month, and maybe we'll do that as like a Patreon. If people are donating any amount to Patreon, they can watch like a private version of it before it gets released or something.
Okay, yeah.
So
What's up with the YouTube thing too? I need to look into that. Like,
they have like paid subscriptions.
Yeah, the paid subscription. I've noticed that on some pages.
You can have paid subscriptions where people can pay a certain amount, and then you can have content that's exclusive to them. I haven't looked into it too much because we don't really have much in the way of things that would be worth that.
We would never make this private or anything.
If we were,
be free.
the podcast. But if we were doing like short films, if we were doing like one or two a month, maybe having those like on a month delay. So if you're a subscribing member, you get to see it. But I'm not sure that's worth $5 a month to people.
Is that the lowest you can go is $5? That's what I saw somewhere was $5, and I was like, that would be steep for some things.
I haven't looked at it too much because like I know you can like rent and sell things because I've looked before on Amazon. So like our short films, a number of them are on Amazon Prime. They got rid of the Amazon ad supported, so you can't just go to Amazon.com and watch stuff anymore with just ads because they got rid of that because I guess not enough people used it. But at Amazon Prime, we still have our short films on there. And some of our short films have gotten more views on Amazon Prime than they have on YouTube and Facebook. Because like Twin Trees has actually gotten a lot of views on Amazon Prime. Just I guess because the search algorithms or whatever, when people search for David Lynch or Twin Peaks, that comes up and people watch it. And so if you're an independent filmmaker, Amazon Prime is a place you might want to look at putting your shorts if you haven't, because some of ours have gotten double or triple the views of the other platforms combined on there. And I'm not even sure, and we don't promote it or anything. We just put them on there, and I looked and noticed that After the Slasher and Twin Trees had way more views than on YouTube.
Made a little bit of money, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a ton of money. It's made like $30, but you get a payout. It's either for minutes or hours, but once you amass a certain amount of minutes or hours of views, they pay you out monthly, because YouTube, what they do is you get paid some amount of ad revenue for ads, and they wait until you build up $100, and then they pay you out whatever that. So until you have $100, it just accrues it in an account, and then once you hit $100, it pays you out whatever that is. So we've gotten paid out on that a number of times, just over the course of the years, a few times. Nowhere close to being able to pay for the site in a single year.
Yeah.
But we've gotten a few payouts of that. Amazon Prime pays you out monthly, so we'll get like $4 a month from, 5,000 minutes of short film viewage or something. So that's a place for an independent filmmaker. Amazon Prime is a decent place to put it.
Well,
the only thing I've seen, because we got one super negative review on IMDb, is where I think somebody may have thought it was a budgeted project that was like an Amazon production, and not that it was a $0 short made with a cell phone.
Yeah.
So I think that in the descriptions, maybe putting what the budget, not saying like this is made for $0, but in the description, have your short story synopsis and then indicate that it's a no budget short. Because that's what I did on.
We ain't got no money.
Because I think sometimes people might think like they might be comparing this to Twin Peaks, The Return or something, because it's showing up on Amazon. They assume everything on there is a budgeted production. So maybe in the description say this no budget, blah, 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 in like the description. Because I think people may have a bit of a misconception about what can be put on there. Did I interrupt you?
Yeah, the one thing as cool about Amazon Prime is like that's I talked about in the previous show. I found the show BuzzFeed Unsolved. Now, granted, BuzzFeed's much bigger than us, whatever, but they do like post just random stuff like that. Like if I go watch, because I watched one of our 2 videos on there, and then it would show you like stuff that's similar.
Yeah.
So you'll see other short filmmakers on there, which is cool because they do that. I don't think anybody else really does, because even on YouTube it doesn't do that. Because you'll go watch like our Rob Zombie's Thanksgiving video. Well, then instead of having other stuff like ours or other filmmakers, it's Rob Zombie crap. Well, so I do like that if you go watch other small stuff, it actually pairs.
It shows you other shorts,
other stuff that you might like because you watched.
Yeah, so it's interesting to do that, because I have watched some of those other shorts on
Amazon's better about that.
The only thing I'll say that you have to be kind of cognizant of is some people put shorts on there from like 2005 and 6
there's
and 7.
A lot of stuff on there.
And I will say the technology gap. So even if somebody has an amazing idea in 2005 or 6, the technology back then was DV cameras that were standard definition. Like HDV came around a few years later, so you have like HD content. But most people, when they made HDV stuff or all that stuff back in 2006, there wasn't a lot of places to put HD video online. So most people had standard definition projects and probably don't even have those elements anymore to go back and remaster it in HD. So you will see some stuff on there that's a little bit older. Some of it, is quality. Just the quality of story and stuff is there, but the quality of the production level isn't necessarily there. But it would be super interesting to see like some stuff from people in 2005 or 6 who are now making bigger projects. But so Amazon Prime, if you're an independent filmmaker, that's somewhere you should look at putting your content. Even if you have a feature film that's kind of out of print and not really doing anything, you can put it on there. And as long as it's, the only things they restrict are like hate speech and graphic frontal nudity. So as long as you're not making like a softcore porn or a movie or people just throwing around racial slurs and stuff like that, you can put it on there. As long as it's rated R by most standards, it's fine. I know there was a little bit of a flap when some independent filmmakers stuff got taken down because of the sexual content. And that's a whole other discussion of,
Patreon pulled some stuff too, I think.
Yeah, well,
Indiegogo.
Indiegogo pulled some projects that had content in it. I remember seeing some articles about that. There's a completely different discussion about, to me, like, so if I see a $15,000 budgeted short film or a $15,000 budgeted feature film that's an indie film, and I watch the trailer and it's nothing but like naked girls like making out and schlocky gore and CG blood spraying around, and it's all just selling it on like this implied prospect of softcore porn nudity stuff.
That's when you hit pre-order.
Well, just to me, that's where it's like, like to one aspect, I get that there's the aspect of you have a certain floor and ceiling on a lot of this content. If you have a super low budget movie, you have a ceiling because you're not gonna reach a mainstream audience with a movie. They'll get in 3 minutes and stop watching because it doesn't look like a Hollywood film,
or you don't have the marketing to even reach a large audience.
Because there's movies where if you give it to a relative, they would watch maybe 3 minutes and be like, this doesn't look like what I'm used to seeing, so I don't like this. And
But I'll go watch NCIS for 5 hours.
So there's the ceiling on it like that. Like you're not going to reach over a certain amount. You can do well in the indie circuit. You can do well and get publication from different magazines and websites and things like that, and get thousands of people to buy it and make it profitable. Like you might be able to make into the 6 digits with an independent film done properly. We're not talking about like Clerks or something where they made it and got picked up by a studio. We're talking about like independent distribution. But there's a certain floor that I think, including all of the softcore porn stuff, means they will sell at least a certain amount that will probably... So on one hand, it makes their money back for them, but it also limits their audience a lot because a lot of people just don't care to watch that. If they're going to watch porn, they'll just go watch it on their phone or on their computer and go to a porn site. And if they want to watch horror, they're going to go watch the actual budgeted project. So it's an interesting dichotomy. Some people might hate that my opinion on that was just that, but
I mean, it's the nature. I mean, it's the reality of it. I think kind of,
because I prefer stories and ideas over gore and nudity. And sometimes too, those things can service the story, and that's fine. It's just if that's the entire point, to me, it's kind of just I don't know how we got on that tangent, but like Amazon Prime. So Amazon Prime will not let you put stuff like that on there. If you have a short film that's just 3 minutes of full frontal nudity and like people doing it, they're not doing it. Don't do sex on it.
There's this is also another tangent, but the most recent episode I watched, which is this podcast going out a week later than we're recording it, of Sharp Objects. There's a male in there who is, shown full frontal naked, but it's in the darkness. And it's like, I think they darkened out and it just looks like he has a black hole down here. So you don't see it because it's so dark. I feel like they had to erase it. Yeah. I mean, it's just like that is a wormhole or something there because he's walking
the person
around.
gets sucked up. No.
Yeah.
Well, it's like on some of the Infinity War posters, Spider-Man, they kind of smoothed out his crotch so it didn't show like any bulge at all. And people are like, you just made Spider-Man a eunuch.
Well, I don't think anybody wants... Now, see...
He's a teenager. He can't go flying around like that.
There's things flopping around his face.
So I'll just say, like... there, like, for some of the projects we have, like, this costume suit thing I was trying on. And...
stuff a sock in it.
And that is something... Like, a lot of those types of
zucchini
suits...
on the side.
They will show everything if you're not careful.
Yeah.
So that's what whoever wears that suit in the short would just take a big zucchini and just...
I think it's you, right?
Yeah, I'll just snip it down the side. That monster's packing. Another monster.
So,
I watched Paris, Texas. You guys are familiar with that film?
I've heard of it.
Yeah, that's basically what I was like, I've heard of Paris, Texas. Everybody said, oh, phenomenal film, amazing film. It's from, let's see here, 1984. I was going to say late 70s. Yeah, 84. It's got Harry Dean Stanton, Dean Stockwell he's from Blue Velvet. They're both Lynch people, but he's from Blue Velvet. He's also in Quantum Leap and a bunch of stuff. I think Scrooge with Bill Murray.
Oh,
The
Scrooge.
taxi driver, maybe.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, Wim Wenders, who is a German filmmaker. So everybody's like, oh, this German filmmaker made like a quintessential American film. You know what I mean? Like it's about America and all this stuff. But Harry Dean Stanton, he plays a character named Travis. The synopsis is an aimless drifter who has been missing for 4 years, wanders out of the desert and must reconnect. This sounds like a little boring with society, himself, his life, and his family.
Yeah.
Like that sounds a little like, whatever, but it is a very, very good film. And it's very mysterious because he comes out of the desert and you're like, why is this guy walking in the desert? And then somebody calls, they figure out, who his brother is. His brother's like, why were you in the desert? You know what I mean? Like it's just, and you don't really know. He's silent through part of the film because something's happened or something. Like it's, it's just a very, very good film. And it's, super enjoyed it. I think it's pretty long though. I feel like it's like 2.5 hours or something. But I was listening to a podcast about it. And actually, let me recommend this guy because his podcasts are all 15 seconds or 15 minutes each about. And he's like a film critic. His name's Stephen Benedict. The podcast image is just a profile picture of his face.
Yeah.
But anyway, I started listening to a bunch of his because I was wanting to hear about Paris, Texas. Like, okay, what are people's perspectives on this? I know it's well renowned, but I want to like know more about this film. I probably can't find it now, but I can't remember the phrase he used, or maybe he was quoting somebody else where he says, it's not necessarily a slow film. It is a well-measured film. And yeah, it's a slow movie, but it feels like it's slow for a reason. But yeah, the way I watched it too was in mornings, like get my daughter up and feed her a bottle, which normally takes like 10 or like maybe 15 minutes or so. So I almost watched it in 15 to 20 minute chunks, almost like a TV series, because I'd watch it every morning, like 15. And it was like an easy way to get through it because I'd already started it a couple times before and just never finished it. But it feels like almost like the pacing, watching it like that felt like I was watching Twin Peaks: The Return. You know what I mean? Like you see like things change every like 15, 20 minutes, but you just don't know where it's going to go. And it's a little bit different and characters come in and out and stuff. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I watched it on the Filmstruck streaming channel. I guess the Criterion, and watched some stuff on there because they always have. That's the thing I love about that channel. Also, is they have all the special features, which Netflix is probably like, hey, our mainstream audiences don't care about anything else but watching the next Larry the Cable Guy movie. You know what I mean? Like they don't want to see the making of whatever.
Adam Sandler is,
and they don't want to probably spend money on bandwidth of storing it, transcoding, and all that stuff. That's what I love about these specific sites too. That's what I like about like Vudu and Amazon. Amazon puts it on at the end of the film, but like Vudu, you can actually break out and watch all the special features on some stuff. And Criterion will have it all on there as well, which I think is super important for streaming because it allows like, you know, people who are big film fans. Yeah, it's not the best, the highest quality, but at the same time, at least you're not missing out on any content, you know? Yeah. Yeah. So that's just something I watched recently that was, yeah, I've been thinking about that film a lot. So I thought it was worth mentioning, even though it's not horror genre or anything like that.
All right. So now I can move into our discussion of the Blair Witch Project, which was released in 1999. And for a while, it was like talked about as one of the most financially successful independent films of all time because it made a lot of money. And if you adjust it for inflation, it's even more because let me look it up. So the Blair Witch Project, because the two, beyond making money, because there's been a lot of movies that made a lot of money, but I don't like Avatar made a lot of money, but it didn't have a ton of cultural impact. And I get that there's a difference in the media over the years because the amount of saturation due to the internet and social media and such. But the Blair Witch Project made a total domestic gross of $140 million with a foreign gross of 108. So it made almost $250 million worldwide off of an estimated production budget of $60,000. And this is one where I do more believe what the production budget is because the sound does sound like things that were captured then. I'm sure they probably did ADR and Foley and all that stuff, but it doesn't seem to me all that unrealistic that was made for $60,000 because it was a mixture of 16 millimeter film and DV because I was back in kind of the beginning of the DV era and the digital video. And that's just a huge amount of money. That's, let's see, looking on Box Office Mojo, it's the number one 1980 to present found footage movie. The number two is Paranormal Activity, which is 107 million, and that was released 10 years after the fact. A little bit over 10 years. So the success of the Blair Witch Project, it's hard to completely accurately estimate it because it's really easy to underestimate how much money that is if you adjust it for inflation. Just because that's a ton of money, and because that's more, that's as much as, because was it Mission Impossible, not the current one, but the prior one made like 150 something million, 160 domestic. So this is a movie that was made for, a little bit of money being close to, I mean, granted, the Mission Impossible is more of a global franchise that made, over $500 million worldwide, but
you can compete.
Just the amount of money it made compared to its budget just, makes that a huge success story.
I was looking at the list recently, and I'm looking it up again too, and it's talking about profit margins on films.
Yeah,
this is acting like the 20 most profitable movies of all time based on return on investment. Paranormal Activity. I don't know why it's not. I don't know where, because I thought I was looking at something about Blair Witch, and this is a list from 2015.
Yeah,
and I don't know.
Well, because
what the deal is with that, but
because other movies that should be on there, like the original Halloween, should be on there because they made that for like $300,000. But when you adjust it for inflation, you know, if Halloween made $70 to $100 million or something in the late 70s, early 80s, you adjust it for inflation, that's double or triple that. And like, I don't understand how you have a list and not have that on there. Let's see, because how much did the original Halloween make? So the original Halloween is listed as grossing $47 million domestic.
Yeah. So I'm on another list too, and yeah, this doesn't have Halloween on here, but this does have Blair Witch. It looks like it's the number 1 on this list from Forbes from 2015.
If you adjust for inflation, so the unadjusted gross of $47 million from 1978, if you adjust that to current day ticket prices, that would have been $186 million for the first Halloween. And that's off of a budget of $300,000. So that's a huge, return on investment. Now, if you adjust that budget for inflation, it's, like $1 million, $2 million, something like that. So it's still a huge profit. Mm-hmm. The Blair Witch Project, if you adjust all that for inflation, that 147 is probably more like 250 or something.
That's what it says, 248.3 as of 2015.
Yeah, so
Rocky's under that. Rocky was made for, I guess, $1 million, and it made 225.
So just, not to talk only like the box office is the only thing that matters on these movies. It's just pointing out the fact that the Blair Witch Project made a crap ton of money. And around that same time, you had episode 1, The Phantom Menace and things like that. And to me, it feels like Blair Witch had just as much cultural impact as these other things.
I think it had more because Blair Witch, even now, like that film
if you have
still influences stuff. If you still has references.
If you have the flashlight up nostril shot, like, I'm sorry, people know what that is.
Yeah, but to be fair, Star Wars, that was the 4th one. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, it's not as cultural impact as the first Star Wars.
No, but
it is a 4th in the series, even though it did come back. Like,
but like, if you
also there were Pepsi machines with on there.
Yeah, but like, if you just ask me like stuff like
what was a bigger deal?
What was a bigger deal? I would. It's obviously Star Wars globally, but But if you look at it, to me, it's like, what do you remember the most? Like, I can pretty much verbatim like give you a couple things that the Blair Witch Project that were extremely memorable to me. And I think overall that movie influenced film. I do not think that Star Wars film influenced anything at all.
When you watch, so we look on IMDb. What's funny with the way the IMDb reviews tend to work, as we've experienced ourselves, is you see a lot of 1 out of 10s. It's like, oh, this is the most overhyped piece of garbage ever. So what happens is if somebody sees something that others like that they didn't, maybe their real review is a 5. They have to give it a 1 just because someone else gave it a 9 or 10.
Yeah.
And so I think with the Blair Witch Project now, a lot of people really hate it because if you watch it in the current day, knowing it's fake, knowing that you've seen found footage movies since then that are just, better technically made films that are easier to watch. Because even though Paranormal Activity didn't have, to me, the cachet or the cash of being a real life event, it didn't have that. I mean, they may have marketed that way or tried to.
They did because people really thought that it was real.
But I knew that it wasn't.
Yeah.
So,
but you're not the general film goer.
So going into it, that movie, it was mostly locked down on a tripod. There was like some stuff, so it was easier to watch movie because there wasn't as much motion, there wasn't as much commotion. It was more locked down shots on a tripod. So even though there's less visually happening, it's not shaky. It's easier just to kind of follow what's going on. And they kind of have like they lay out the timeline of when these things are happening, like what day it is and things like that. So the Blair Witch Project is, from a technical standpoint, harder to watch today just because it's a lot shakier. It was in the, back then, a lot of the like those digital cameras. Now, the camera we're shooting this podcast on, the Sony, it has like built-in stabilization, so the lens kind of moves a little bit with the image that's in focus, so that even if you're just handheld, it's not that shaky. And then they have all the gimbals now you can put on, like the Ronins and all these different stabilizing systems that can give you really buttery smooth footage when you're walking around and running. Granted, now for like a documentary like Blair Witch, if you're actually shooting that in the woods, those batteries don't last for hours upon hours and they would get heavy. But the filmmaking technology is there to make a movie like this today, and it doesn't induce motion sickness as much.
So I was, rewatching this again. I watched it. I thought we'd done a podcast on this because I guess I'd rewatched it.
We did the 2016 reboot.
Yeah, I guess I was just like, okay, I want to revisit this because this film did mean a lot to me when I was younger. watching this time, because I was like writing down some notes too, and I was like, actually, so at the time, everybody's like, oh, is this real? Is it not real? That served a lot for the film, but also because it looked real, it looked like everybody's home videos. I think almost now the aesthetic of it being really shaky and really kind of, not pristine at all. Like the way that because it looks so aged, I think is actually making this film age even better. Yeah. Because if you watch a film from 97 that looks a little, some other films you watch from 97, this looks dated, it takes me out of it. This actually now in 2018 puts you in the film even more. Because it feels like you're watching old home footage from another era. You know what I mean? Like it's even further removed, and it just feels so authentic, I think, and it strengthens it.
You watch something like...
It's not a negative, unlike other films age in certain ways that look old.
Kind of like William brought up, too, is when you watch something like Cloverfield, or... Because that's something I think was directly... took from this, and Paranormal Activity, those other films, like they feel like a Hollywood production.
Yes, yeah.
And this movie does not feel like a Hollywood production.
Well,
because
it's
the way
almost like
that
further away
looks.
from it, it starts to feel more real again.
Well, because it almost feels like you are watching something on VHS, and less like something that was produced in a studio.
Well, something that too does give things different feels.
And these aren't the best actors either. They're not.
They were early in their career actors that weren't super, because what they wanted was people that weren't super recognizable. So they wanted actors that were good enough to pull out what they were going for, but that weren't recognizable enough that people immediately go, oh, I saw them in this different show or movie.
Yes, on an episode of Friends.
So that, and two, I think they did a good job at what they're asked to do. Just because, like, I remember reading stuff about the production, like they would give them like kind of an outline of here's where to go, and they knew things were going to happen, they didn't know what. So then they would go and do stuff at night, and they're trying to get more like visceral, genuine reactions and stuff. But like something too that if you watch Cloverfield, so me, when that movie came out in 2008, being like a camera nerd, reading up on the cameras they used to shoot Cloverfield, they did not shoot them on the camera that's portrayed in the movie as being the one that they're using.
No, but you can watch
in the movie they make it look as if they're using like a little camcorder. And it doesn't make any sense because they say they recovered the footage off of an SD card, but there's footage that overwrote other footage, which you can't do on an SD card. Like on SD cards is individual files that you would then just continue making files. And then if anything, you would delete old ones. On tape, you could record, rewind, and record over it. So that's something that always like bugged me. It took me out of it a little bit. But in that movie, they shot that like on a combination of some like $5,000-ish like Panasonic, whichever one is like those P2 cards, like these $5,000 cameras, what they shot a lot of the movie on. But then they also use like these Thompson Viper cameras that were like hundreds of thousands of dollars cameras they used on big budget Michael Mann movies and stuff. And because that was kind of like the big cameras in HD before the Reds and stuff. So they shoot these movies on these combination of cameras. They give it a look that no consumer camera could ever capture or come close to. And that gives it a little bit of glossiness and makes the city line look better. Makes that gives them a high quality image to put the special effects in, because a cheap consumer camera, they literally could not composite all the effects on that low quality image for Cloverfield.
It felt that was Matt Reeves that directed that, right? Too.
Yeah,
who is the recent Planet of the Apes movies that are phenomenal. That film, even though it's glossier and it takes you think like, okay, yeah, this is a production or whatever. That does a better job of being authentic versus Survival of the Dead. Like,
oh yeah,
I think, or Diary of the Dead.
Yeah.
I think Diary of the Dead should have been shot more like Blair Witch. They should not have tried to make it look slick at all.
So Diary of the Dead. So getting all these changes. So Cloverfield, I did enjoy the movie.
Yeah,
I did enjoy it. I'm just pointing out like little nitpicks that.
Well, we're just using these because this movie influenced these.
And most people probably don't pick those elements out. Like, wow, the quality of this footage is amazing.
Yeah, nobody's going to do that.
Nobody's really thinking about that. But like Diary of the Dead was a movie I was so excited for because it's George Romero. He's, the king of zombies. Found footage at the time was kind of like a fresh thing to do these different genres with it because it wasn't really inundated with it at that point. And it's like, oh, here's like a master filmmaker who's made all these movies that are hugely influential, going back and making something on technology that's similar to stuff I could be using now in my projects. So to me, that was super exciting. But then you watch Diary of the Dead, and that was in the early days of YouTube and MySpace. I think they actually name-checked MySpace in it and stuff. So that was in the early days of social media and web video. We saw it at University of Louisville at the theater.
They had a screening there.
And it's just, okay, here's somebody that wants to get this, that it's script written for him, but it's somebody who at the time was 70, 60, he was up there in age, somebody directing something that is in a style that it just feels like that was a movie that Romero himself shouldn't have made. It should have been made by an up and coming filmmaker, because maybe he produced it and was involved with it, and it's just somebody who is native to that. What I mean that is like, so a lot of movies now like do these takes on YouTube vloggers and stuff like that. But a lot of times it's like these old Hollywood types that are used to making standard, like, so Martin Scorsese is an amazing filmmaker, but if he made a movie that has a bunch of vlogger YouTube stuff, it would probably feel inauthentic or fake because he's not from that generation. And he's used to making more of these more standard films. Maybe it's a bad example. I'm just saying, like,
yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah.
So I think that like Diary of the Dead would have probably been better handled if it was people who were doing this type of stuff in the moment and learning it.
Yeah.
Versus like an established, experienced filmmaker trying to do that. But I was excited about the time. I haven't rewatched it in years, so maybe it's something that I should rewatch and do for the podcast because it'd just be fun to revisit that.
Have you ever seen that, Derek? Diary of the Dead?
No.
That was the one I remember, though. There was a part where they were filming something on a Nokia camera phone, and it looked like a video game. They're driving in a RV through a bunch of zombies. It looked really bad.
Yeah. He did some nice long, like he tried to have that feel because he would stage some long takes, single shot takes, you know what I mean? To make it feel like it was unbroken action and no editing and stuff but it's just on the whole, not a stellar film. But
so
anyway,
getting back to Blair Witch, I think one of the other things that made it an interesting movie is like the first part of it's more like a documentary.
So that part to me is my favorite part.
Yeah,
when they're
that's
discussing the locals.
And so some of that really, I didn't do any research on this, or it could have been based upon like real stuff, and they really just interviewing real people.
No, I think it was just scripted.
It's all scripted. But I was saying, you could have went either way with that, and it would have been believable because that feels like a lot of like if you ever watching ghost hunting shows or Bigfoot shows, like it feels a lot, like that.
Those feel more fake though when they do those interviews.
Yeah, because they're like, Jimmy Dean got hit upside the head with a boulder, but like
they did a good job.
The Jersey Devil sexually assaulted.
It's all building the lore, kind of getting into it and kind of creeping you out because it's like you're being told ghost stories by people you know.
Well, and something too that is part of this movie's experience that you don't get it all now. At the time, like I said, there was those TV specials like on MTV, like Sci-Fi or whatever, these different channels that had like the documentaries about it as if it was real.
Yeah.
So that just built up this lore going in. So you had these, they were shot like those shows at that time. So you had these different specials that kind of built up the lore of this. So you go and you watch, you get all the backstory. It's like, oh, there's this creepy witch and there is this guy that killed these kids, and you get all this stuff and you're like, man, this actually, this is scary.
Came in.
And then you go and you watch the movie, and it's like, oh, here's what happened to the people that actually got into the real location. Here's what happened.
It's funny though when you go back and you watch that movie. And I know it's a lot of it's because of production stuff, but really like nothing happens.
And it's one of those things where it's an experience you could never recreate what happened in 1999 when you saw it.
Yeah, like this is a movie that I think is it's a one-time thing. Like you can make stuff that replicates it, but it's not going to be the same. Because really, like, when you go back and watch this movie, it's just more so on, like, the ambiance and the just kind of like the ride they go through there. But again, there's no monster in it. It just kind of all...
it really is almost like a piece of art where it's like, you can always replicate somebody's piece of art or whatever, but, like, it is very much, it made this genre essentially. There had been other films like this before, but it kind of
like I don't know you could have a movie like this put it in theaters now where really nothing actually happens. It's all just kind of like, obviously stuff happens. You'd have like little Blair Witch symbol things that's like all over the place, but like there's really no creature in the thing.
Well, it's people lost in the woods.
Yeah. And like if you went and sold this on the same group of people, which would be like teens to early 20s nowadays, and you sold them on this, given everything we have now, this movie probably would not be very successful because there's nobody getting pulled off screen by a ghost. There's no.
Well, you had the Blair Witch when it came out, so the reboot sequel in 2016, and
it wasn't as successful.
They initially were marketing it as The Woods and talking about how scary it was, and then they did a screening. It was at Comic-Con or something where they had all the stuff in the lobby said The Woods, the new movie from Adam Wingard, and then they did the screening. And during the screening, they realized it was a Blair Witch sequel. And then then when they came out into the lobby afterwards, all the signage had been replaced with the Blair Witch.
So you're talking about a sequel to the original 17 years after, where Blair Witch had not been in the social conscious for forever. They only did one sequel, correct? And it was
Well, they did The Book of Shadows, which was a theatrical film that wasn't found footage. I mean, it had some found footage stuff in it, but it was mostly a theatrical film.
Yeah.
And it had a larger ensemble cast.
But it was not received very well.
I mean, it still made money.
Yeah, it made money just because off the name.
All these movies, even the Blair Witch, compared to its budget, I think like a $5 million budget, it did make some money.
Yeah. I was saying, to me, it's just a very weird thing that, like, take something and do a sequel to this, which is a big movie, but I feel like it's just kind of a one-shot.
Well, there's part...
Go ahead, William.
I was going to say something, too, though, is the Blair Witch, you have the mystique around the original of is, it's real, and you make a sequel to it however many years later, 17 years later, everyone knows that it's not real, and I think a lot of people remember the experience of enjoying that found footage the first time they watched it in 99, and maybe haven't watched found footage since, and then they go and watch the Blair Witch, the 2016 one, they're like, this is found footage. I don't like this.
Yeah.
So I think that's a lot of people.
I thought of an idea for a sequel to this. The thing that they do a lot of times when it's like, okay, we've made some sequels, let's ignore all the sequels, and now let's make an actual just direct sequel to the original, or whatever. How they always overwrite the other films in the series or whatever, which kind of the other Blair Witch did. But my ideal for a sequel to this would make it feel, closer to this would be essentially somebody found another tape from the 90s.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like updated, nothing like that. Same look, same feel. Because if you shot it and had that aesthetic, it would put you in that moment more than something like the new Blair Witch.
Or you'd have another group of people like Shaun of the Dead that's the literal mirror image of these other people that they run into each other in the woods.
Well, essentially, it's somebody else that went in the woods after they saw the movie Blair Witch.
Yeah.
Because they thought it was real.
Yeah.
They go into the woods, and then instead of it being a giant Blair Witch like in the sequel, there is maybe there's some other people there, and maybe it's another force. Maybe it's actually human people that are going to do something to blame it on this force because it is a phenomenon or something.
Yeah.
Like you could do something very interesting with making a film about the first film being a phenomenon, getting all this attention, and then do something, you know what I mean? Like you could do something interesting and then shoot it like that.
Kind of like the clown phenomenon we had a couple years ago where everybody was dressed up like clowns and doing that weird stuff where it'd take like this and people would take it seriously, but they were trying to commit actual crimes but getting away with it because these kids just went in the woods and
just set it right after this film came out and acknowledge that the other one was released in cinemas and these people are just some random dumb kids going in the woods trying to figure out where it is. Like that would be a kind of a cool different movie that you could do super cheap, Well,
and two, so something that like that concept, I do like the idea of you do like people reacting to it and going out trying to get themselves.
Yeah. Like people used to do Jackass
and then what they're running into is other people who are being nefarious. But then still keeping
because they've seen the film too.
But then keeping the lore of like, no, this shit's actually real, like in the background.
Yeah.
Because like something in the last podcast about the Village that in the comments Defuck Games had mentioned was like the Village is like, well, here's this thing, but it's not this thing, but maybe it is. You should be scared.
Yeah, but I don't think you should go back. I think you should just acknowledge because everybody knows it's not real. You know what I mean? That the mystique is broken from that first film. I think don't do that. I think you wouldn't make people a little upset, but change genres like, hey, no, these people are in trouble, but it's from other people or, or something like that.
Well,
like, I don't know what the solution would be, but I don't think you do another Supernatural because the Supernatural, either you're not going to show anything, so it's going to be more boring, or you're going to show stuff like the Blair Witch sequel, and it's just like, whatever, it's a giant witch. I don't want to see
or
that.
just do a cryptid, and it's like some
So something I had read or heard in interviews or podcasts or whatever is in that the Blair Witch, what you see in that movie is not actually the Blair Witch.
Oh, yeah. But
and that they imply there's like some type of time loop that when you get caught in the woods that's part of the thing. So... But I think that something...
But I think get rid of all the supernatural stuff because, I don't know, just trying to make it something more real and scary.
Because, like, the thin line with supernatural, and two, people who watch a lot of horror movies, it's really hard to, quote-unquote, scare people that watch a lot of movies, or that... Not that we've worked on big Hollywood movies or anything like that, but when you work on projects and you get to see kind of how the sausage is made, even at any level of production, then you watch it and it's more of like you see the seams... and you see the kind of because a lot of TV shows I've said you can see the seams of it. It's like they're just padding this out to make it 10 episodes. A lot of movies you can see the seams of like, oh, they're doing this to do that. So this scene you can do this. And you watch it and you have that happen. So it's hard to really be that scary. And I just think like I am kind of jealous of my 1999 self being able to watch something without all that knowledge and just be fully taken in. It's like, holy shit, this is real.
Yeah,
and it's something that I can't do again.
Again, this is, well, we talk about Hot Fuzz not starting out with like a murder, not starting with action or whatever. This doesn't start off with a murder or anything. It just starts out with them talking about it. Kind of spooks you out with the history. The only music in the film really is them in the car, you know, which definitely sets you in that time as well. Again, makes it more authentic. And then really it's like a scary movie that doesn't rely on any music or anything like that throughout the whole film. Even the credits, there's just like some noise or whatever. But it's not like a song playing or anything like that or score. Like it's a very different type of horror film. And I think that was like, people weren't used to that then too, you know? And
to the big gore moments where they found that one little package that had like bloody teeth in it.
Fingers, right?
Or I think it's bloody teeth and like hair and stuff. So that was like the big gore moment was seeing that.
I always thought it was fingers that were in there. The guy's fingers for some reason.
That was teeth.
But I always thought that.
But then you have the element of like they wake up out of their tents because like so as a kid when I was little, when I was 6, 7, I don't remember. It was before we lived in the house, or it was in the house before the one our parents live in now. So I forget when the era was. It was
midnight, early 90 to 96.
And it was when I was young. So this was earlier in that era. So it was when I was like 7 or something. I had stayed the night at a friend's house, and me and him, or him and I, and then his sister and his sister's friends all stayed in a tent in their backyard. So it was like us two, and then like his sister was like a couple years older than us. They may have been more like 10 or something, and like her and a couple of her friends. And we were asleep. We were staying in a tent out in their backyard. They had like a relatively large-ish backyard. And this was before the neighborhoods behind that area were developed. So it was mostly just like a big field that was behind a lot of these neighborhoods and like trees and stuff. And we were all out in the tent at nighttime, in the middle of the night. And we're, about to fall asleep in this. I think we were asleep. And then we start hearing like some pawing on the tent and like people like touching it. And then the kid who was my friend was sleeping. He had like his head close to the edge of the tent. And there was a soccer ball in the backyard. And somebody kicked the soccer ball so it hit his head through the tent. And then like stuff was touching the tent. Like we woke up immediately, and like everybody was freaking out. So then like somebody's like, okay, we're going to run straight to the house, like unzip the tent. Like in the movie, in the Blair Witch, unzip the tent. And the second, as the tent's being unzipped, we're all like shooting straight to their house and going in the back door. And then the kid's dad goes outside. We wake them up, his parents up, and like his dad throws on like pants and shoes and goes and like hops a bunch of fences. And it's like some 14, 15-year-old kids that live down the street who were just trying to scare us. And so like those moments, like the way they react in the tents is what I remember happening.
Yeah, for sure.
So those are like elements that you can identify with if you've ever experienced anything like that.
Another thing I was thinking about, the whole thing of being lost in the woods, like that's identifiable thing. You know, like that's just scary alone. Just being lost in the woods by itself, like, oh crap. And because it has that found footage feel, you're never outside of it. You feel like you're there with them, lost in the woods, and they can't get their way out. Yeah. And that was definitely a thing. I don't know how much people go in woods when they're younger now, but like when I was a kid, that's what we would go play in the woods and just, be in there and just be in the woods, deep into the woods, and like, okay, how do we get back out? Like
in this pre-smartphone, so you couldn't just pull up maps and stuff. And so I think that a lot of that in that movie too, watching it did make me feel like fall because the movie has like a look to it that feels like that.
It feels like Halloween. Like it feels like a good October.
And it's one of those things where, so the movie, even though people a lot of times now talk about like, oh, it's the most overrated movie and I hate it. Like the end scene, people still, that's something I vividly still can remember is when they go into the house and then you see the one guy in the corner and all. So there's just those elements that to me stand out. And that's why the Blair Witch, when it shows a lot more of that house and does a lot more of it, to me it goes too far almost. It shows you too much.
Yeah.
And I think just leaving it to short snippets is scary. And that's still like a very memorable thing. And then I remember people saying like, oh, can you hear the Blair Witch? Like when the camera's laying on the ground.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
And they're like, oh, is it the Blair Witch that picks the camera up and takes it and stuff? So there's all these different things that lend to the creepiness of it. And especially watching that thinking it's real. It's like these people are now like hypnotized or haunted or dead or what happened. So watching that in the theater, I can imagine people losing their minds.
Yeah, I watched this on VHS at home. Yeah, but that last scene, like, I told my wife, I'm like, okay, I want to watch, because she was like about to come over. I'm like, oh, let me watch this scene real quick. I was like, because this scene is actually scary to me, and it's still creepy to me. Like, at few things that are
good.
Like, I'm like, okay, this is like one of my favorite scenes in a horror film. You know, this moment right here, because of all the buildup, like the slow burn buildup, and the kind of just building. Okay, first they're lost, something weird's going on. You know, they had been told the story about him standing the kids in the corner.
Yeah,
you know, like all that stuff. Because of all that, like it lands so strong, because you haven't had like a strong release yet either.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it was all leading up to that exclamation point, and it worked for me.
You get snippets of things happening, but you don't get to see any. You don't get to see a glimpse of a creature in the woods. You don't get to see a death scene.
Yeah. Well, one, they didn't have the budget for it, and two, I think the way they did it worked so much better. And I do think that, you know, we've talked about this, less is more. And sometimes if you don't have the budget and you put a monster in there anyway, it's either going to be just so unbelievably bad that it pulls you completely out of the experience, or it's going to be just so lackluster again.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh, okay, I mean, it's not a terrible design, but it's kind of.
Well, if you, I think I think that the element of showing less works
in that,
unless you want to go over the top and make it not scary, just part of the story. Then it's fine to show it and to have it throughout, because. Like Cloverfield, if they had never showed the Cloverfield monster, that movie would not have worked.
No.
So they did. I mean, they might have not showed it enough for a lot of people, but they did show it some. But I think
never showed it again in any of the other subsequent movies.
Blair Witch. No, it's at the end of the Cloverfield Paradox.
I had to
briefly.
watch 22 hours of that crap to see it.
But like Blair Witch, like I think not showing a lot throughout works to its advantage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the pacing of the movie, like. It's one of those things, like I said, like it's hard to rate this, because if I had rated this based on my experience of seeing it when I was in middle school in 1999, this is, you know, one of the scariest things ever when I was under the conception of like, is this real or fake? Is this real? Oh, this is so scary.
But I think now just knowing, being an adult and knowing how rights work, and like there's no way this was real, that the families would ever release this to be watched.
I think you underestimate how much money that people...
Unless if they were going to make a crap ton of money, because there's just so much
or
to it.
Unless they already signed away their rights to the footage for the documentary, which the production company owned it, in which case they're like, this is a landmine. This is a gold mine.
Yeah.
Because what was it like on... what was the Tropic Thunder? They made the documentary about the making of the movies, so that was like the Oscar winner or something.
Yeah.
On the Ben Stiller, Robert Downey Jr., Jack Black movie.
Which movie's still very good.
But yeah, so the Blair Witch, so it had some genuine scares at the very end scene, which I still think is an iconic scene that people will remember. I do think that if people watch that, if somebody is 17 years old and they know that it's not real, and they've seen Paranormal Activity and they've seen Unfriended and The Gallows and all these more modern found footage type movies, I think that watching the Blair Witch, it's not going to...
This is a much less rewarding movie in the world of your Paranormal Activities.
Because there's less that's shown on screen, and knowing that it's not real, I think takes away a lot of the...
I think people know that Paranormal Activity is not real now, but people like those movies still made a crap ton of money up until the last one, I think.
But I think though, because of those movies,
there's the experience.
So the Blair Witch Project is more about like an actual physical witch in the woods kind of. And Paranormal Activity is more about ghosts. And I think that people are more into ghosts now than creatures. Yeah. I think.
Well, I mean, you even argued that the witch was a ghost, but it's really whatever. But I don't know. I just think that it's easier to sell those movies because crap happens constantly. Whereas in this,
I mean, it's still
very slow burn. Not a lot happens that, you know. So I think it'd be much harder.
And it's things that
it was hard for me to watch it through this time because I got bored.
And it's things that are scary to the characters in the movie, but not necessarily to the audience. Like seeing like the little figures hanging in the trees. Yeah. Creepy imagery. It'd be scary as hell if you're there in real life, but as an audience today watching it. So I think it's one of those movies that's going to be kind of hard to give a score to, because I do think that a lot of people watch it and hear about the experience that like their parents had, or their older friends, or their older siblings, or whatever. People explain the experience they had watching it. Because I can imagine watching this at the drive-in the weekend it came out thinking it was real, and you're watching like out in a big field that's out somewhere, it's like woods at the edges of it, and you have to drive home through the woods, like that'd be creepy as hell. But watching it today on, YouTube or Amazon or whatever it's on, sitting there on your couch, if you're 17 years old and you've already seen all these other movies and you've seen Veronica or like all these things that now people talk about being scary, you watch the Blair Witch, you're probably gonna be disappointed by it, and then you're gonna be like, everybody says this is one of the scariest films of all time, this is terrible. And then the fact that you went into it knowing that people said it's the scariest film of all time, or that's been bandied about and discussed, changes your perception of it.
Yeah. Well, I say like this, like it does. The fact that it looks like a movie from '99 that you filmed by yourself does kind of add to it a little bit, but it does subtract from current people. And again, I think this movie is something that's hard to rate. Like I'm still gonna give it a rating, obviously, but I'm gonna have to just give it like its legacy rating, like not necessarily what I experienced when I watched it, because I was kind of bored.
So what do you rate it?
If I'm going legacy, like what I think this movie meant to like a decade of filmmaking, and what I think it did to horror in that moment, because you gotta remember at the same time, like this was, you had that, and then you had like, I can't remember the name of the MTV show, but it was when we watched all the time. Fear something.
Fear Itself? Or no, Fear Itself was a anthology series.
But you had like, it was like something similar, like they would send people Fear Factory.
No, it was it was just MTV's Fear, I think.
MTV's whatever it was, but it was like
in like a factory type thing.
Yeah, if you've never seen the show,
a band, I think.
Yeah,
that's
like, they would go, because we live in Louisville, so we have Waverly. They would go like Waverly Hills, and they have like a safe room, but then they would send people to investigate stuff by themselves. So
it was just Fear, MTV's Fear.
But when did that come out?
2000.
So this is like right after the release of that and stuff. So you had all this stuff.
And the opening theme song is Voodoo by Godsmack.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Voodoo.
But like you had shows like that, and then this is when all the ghost hunting stuff picked up. So I think this influenced all that. Plus, then you had movies years later that it was influencing. So I think if I give it a legacy score, not necessarily my experience off of it recently, but it's got to be like a 9 or a 10. I don't think there's any way that it could be less than a 9. I'm going to go with a 10 as far as it's a legacy.
Yeah,
it's not a perfect film by any
I was thinking, I was like, you know what? I don't care. I'll just give this film a 9. Like, it's a different experience of watching this than a typical horror film. For me, now I'm watching it, it's just like, this is almost like a fun, like if I'm watching somebody's old home video where nothing really happens, but it's just that voyeuristic thing of like, I'm just watching these people go about their lives and fight and argue, and like, there's drama, you can see the tensions rising, and that's where the thing, like, nothing happens, but stuff happens. Like they start arguing and fighting, you know what I mean? Because they get stressed out, and you're like, okay, I can see why they'd be stressed out and fighting in the woods, being lost. Like stuff happens. It's just not your traditional horror film of like, oh, this, boogeyman's not popping up every 5 minutes.
You'd also argue that this film is like just a textbook case of mass hysteria where all these people get out there and they get dehydrated and food deprived and they go insane, and like the person that's chasing him is really one of the other people in the group that's just lost his mind.
Or when they get to the house, like they so become deluded by what they think has happened, they just die from like fright.
Yeah. So I mean, like, I think there's
legacy. It's a 10, I think, but even still, like, it's a different type of film to watch. So, like, again, it's almost like an art piece. Like, this is a weird thing I'm watching of these people just in the woods. Like, so it's a totally different experience and thing. And even though I'm saying it's a 9, it's a it's a different time. So you have to be in the mood for it for sure.
I just don't think that if you, like I said,
nobody now kids would care about it now.
No, but like I just look at what all it did, because we really enjoyed the show Fear, and there's so much other stuff like that.
Found footage itself. So there had been like the last broadcast before Blair Witch.
That up.
And then there was.
Have you guys seen that?
I have seen parts of it, and people talked about it.
I've got a copy of it.
And then, you also had like Cannibal Holocaust, which was kind of like a documentary type thing that was sold as, being real. Because that was one where like the producers had to go to court and show they didn't actually kill people.
Yeah.
But so the Blair Witch Project really created, it popularized the modern concept of found footage. And without the Blair Witch, you would not have had Cloverfield and some of these other things, I don't think. Because even though other movies had done that, none of them had had the critical and financial success of the Blair Witch that kind of made that seem to be a viable filmmaking technique for people. And there's been other movies like End of Watch that was like police body cams that had Jake Gyllenhaal and Michael Pena, that was directed by the same David Ayers, who went on to do Suicide Squad. So there's been a lot of iterations or types of found footage-ish movies.
Frankenstein's
Army, which seems pretty similar to the new movie Overlord in that it's like Nazi experiments. But So the Blair Witch, if I'm giving a score, I'm kind of giving it like 2 scores. So I think that if you watch it now as a contemporary movie and you have none of the history of it and you don't care, it's not real, I can see someone very easily giving it a 4 out of 10.
Yeah. I think it's very
saying
fair.
like there's a creepy scene at the end, some decent stuff peppered throughout. It has like a gritty realism to it, but there's not enough that happens in it, and it doesn't make a compelling watch from beginning to end today. So I could see that being somebody who watches it like tomorrow for the first time, saying, who doesn't have any of the history behind it and doesn't care. But being somebody that was aware of it when it happened, because when I saw that in middle school, my friend and I, he used to set a tent up in his backyard and we would camp. And by camp, I mean we had a TV and a Nintendo 64 and Pepsis and Mountain Dews and chips and Cokes and stuff and like a blow-up mattress.
Suburban camping.
Basically just able to go out and stay in the backyard and not wake his parents up when we played video games till 4 a.m. And then I just remember everybody getting too scared having to go back inside.
Yeah.
And it's just like the experience of a movie that does that. When you think the Blair Witch is real, I don't even remember where I saw it because it was rated R, right?
You probably saw it at Dixie Dozen.
No, I'm trying to remember. It was rated R. So in 1999, I would have been 14. So I don't think I'm trying to remember how I saw it. Because maybe you saw it at a drive-in or something. I don't remember. But I remember seeing it when people were still debating if it was real or not. Mm-hmm. So that just really added to the mystique of it. And they had like those shows on TV that I remember watching that built up the lore of it. So from that aspect, it's like a 9 or 10 because what I thought it was at the time and the way it was marketed and the way that it was perceived and all this ancillary material that built into it. But in terms of just watching it now, I could easily see somebody just turning it off halfway through.
Yeah, because like I said, there's not much payoff throughout the entire movie.
So it's one of those movies that it's a hard thing to rate, watching it now versus the legacy of it. So I could understand people watching this podcast saying it's one of their favorite movie experiences, or people watching this and saying, I watched it recently and I hated it. So I definitely get both sides of the coin. I just think that experience is something that we're probably in the internet era today would never get again. And it would be very difficult to get that type of experience short.
I mean, now you have viral release films. That's it's the difference. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
People that release a film virally and then they don't have any background history. Like you can keep things secret. They make secret films all the time, but I think now, like, just releasing something through the internet is now how people get tricked.
Like short films and
stuff like that. Yeah, it's the same thing. Unknown people that come out of the woodwork and make something great or spooky or something.
Well, that's how like Slenderman came to be. Was it started off as like the kind of
talk about Slenderman.
I'm just saying, like they had like the Marble Hornets video series that people thought was real. So you have these things like now where it's probably online videos where that would happen versus a movie because it's hard to suspend disbelief that this is a real movie because, as we said, like the Blair Witch, they did have the actors sign contracts and they wouldn't do public appearances for like a year or something after the movie was shot. Yeah. And then eventually they did do, like once the movie came out, they did do the rounds of, different shows and things. But yeah, so like I said, I could easily see it being like a 4 out of 10 if you just watch it today and have no connection to it. But when I watched it at the time, it was one of the scariest things that had happened. So to me, it was like a 9 or 10. So it's kind of hard to really give it like an in-between score. It's just saying, like, I understand if you rewatch it today versus if you have any affinity for it, that changes it. Because I've seen people talk about, like, oh, the original Halloween is super boring. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10. And it's just, if you have no affinity for it, I see that. I see why.
Well, that's what I almost, like I said, give it a legacy score.
Yeah, so it's kind of risky business doing that, just rating things based on the legacy versus what's on the screen. But, yeah I mean, like, at the time, it's still hugely influential. It's just people have seen all the things that took that and then amped it up a lot. So after you see Cloverfield, going back and watching Blair Witch, it seems kind of boring to people, to standard audiences that don't keep up with horror stuff. So,
real quick, the last broadcast, just because Derek doesn't know what it's about. It's a film told in documentary format. It tells the story of a man convicted of murdering multiple people one night while searching for the Jersey Devil in the New Jersey Pine Barrens in 1995. And it was directed by Stefan Avalos and Lance Weller. They directed, produced it, wrote it, starred in it, and Stefan did the music for it as well. The budget was $900, and it made over $4 million. It made $4 million internationally and just like 12,000 here, which still 12,000 here is a profit. If but that's what I'd always heard. Like, oh, was this the inspiration for Blair Witch because it came out a year earlier? But It says the film is sometimes erroneously cited as, this is Wikipedia, but an inspiration of Blair Witch Project, but the concept for that film was developed in 1993, The Blair Witch, and production began in October 97, which was 5 months before the premiere of the last broadcast. So, but the last broadcast is a cool little piece of cinema history as well.
Yeah.
When looking at the lineage of found footage film.
Yeah, so The Blair Witch wasn't the first movie to do that. It was just the most successful and visible, and the one that had the media firestorm. And it did have a huge cultural impact because people still remember that today. People have never seen the movie.
No references, yeah.
But so that wraps up our discussion of The Blair Witch Project. And if you're listening via iTunes, you can do us a huge favor, leave a review there. That helps other people find the podcast. You can find all the work we're doing at houseofastore.com. Make sure to follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and all those places because we'll have some new content. Hopefully, we're going to have 2 shorts in October. At least
before the end of the year, probably.
Yeah, so we're hoping to have some stuff out, so keep an eye out for all that. But if you want to find us specifically on our net, you can find me on Instagram at @TheWilliamCaps.
You can find me at MetaWorldDerek.
And I'm at BlevinSean on Twitter.
And that'll wrap up this episode of the House of A Store podcast. Thanks for listening.
House by the